We're going to take you live now to Canberra, where Security Minister Clare O'Neil is speaking at the National Press Club.
In a series of cyber attacks on major Australian companies of late. It's just one of the many new forms of challenges to our sense of personal and national security that have emerged in recent years, even as the threat of terrorism, which dominated much of the first 2 decades of the century, has eased. Our speaker today has been put in charge of the mega department established a few years ago to embrace all these security issues and much more besides. We look forward to hearing from Home Affairs Minister Clare O'Neil on her agenda. Please join me in welcoming her to the podium.
We face a time of great global challenge. Before us lie many risks and many choices. As Australians, we carry into that challenge the most precious of gifts. Our nation is entwined with the wisdom and resilience of 60,000 years of Indigenous culture. I honour the enduring custodianship of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of Canberra. I acknowledge the Indigenous Australians who are here with us today. I acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues who have joined us, and I want to note that we have a large number of national security leaders here with us in this room. And I want to say, on behalf of government and on behalf of the Australian people, how truly grateful we are for your national service. Thank you. 2 years ago, I spoke at the National Press Club for the first time. I spoke about how crisis and challenge have been pivotal to Australia's national story. When the chips are down, Australians are willing, in a way that is quite unusual around the world, to throw off old ideas about society and government and make big, gutsy choices about our future. From the depression of the 1890s came our federation, built on a national commitment to equality and delivered through the age pension and the harvester judgment. From the existential shock of the Second World War emerged our proud multicultural Australia and a new place for our country in the world. The long malaise of the 1970s gave birth to a reform agenda that led to the longest period of continuous economic growth of any country anywhere in the world. In each case, a period of extraordinary challenge for our country, which led to radical, uniquely Australian solutions to the problems we confronted. And each time we did it together, as one country, with humility, humour, ambition, bravery and resolve. When I last spoke at the Press Club, I was an opposition junior frontbencher, with a lot of ideas but perhaps not a lot of power to do much about them. Today, I speak from a different perspective, deeply honoured to be a part of a new government that can, will and must change how our country thinks about its future. So today I want to do three things. I want to speak about the generational challenge that faces our country. I want to talk about what that challenge means for Home Affairs, and I want to describe how our government is reimagining the work of my department to help Australia take it on. The Department of Home Affairs was recreated in 2017 to protect the domestic security of our country. It's only 5 years ago, but there would be few 5-year periods in history in which Australia's national security picture has changed so much. It is overwhelming to list all that's happened in that period. A 1 in 100 year pandemic, bushfires which burned millions of acres of land and left our capital cities covered in choking smoke. Cyber attacks which saw the personal information of literally millions of Australians stolen from them. 3 big shifts stand out as most important. When Home Affairs was first created, the discussion about climate change and national security was largely academic, and indeed it was derided by the former government. Just 5 years on, climate change is a recognised growing part of Australia's national security picture. Climate change is creating massive movements of people that may become unmanageable. Already, natural disasters are forcing about 21.5 million people each year from their homes. In our region, this, alongside foreseeable food and energy shortages, will be big vulnerabilities that we are going to need to work with our neighbours to address. Climate change is creating natural disasters at rolling frequency. For affected Australians, these disasters can be life-shattering. And from a security perspective, their management is a hugely consuming task for government and the community, and this in itself is a national security risk. What I am most worried about here is what will happen in the event of cascading disasters. Imagine a future January where we see a Black Saturday-sized bushfire in the southeast, a major flood in the north of our country, and then overlay a cyber attack on a major hospital system on the west coast. Our government would be fully absorbed in the management of that crisis, and then consider how capable we would be of responding to and engaging with a security issue in our region. In the 40-odd years since I was born, we've looked out into a region where there has been almost a sense of inevitability about increasing wealth and democratisation, and that is clearly changing. China is a hugely powerful influence over our friends and neighbours. And over this last 5 years, we have learned a lot about how this big and powerful country will exert its will in the years to come. And even beyond our region, the global world order is shifting and creaking. Big state politics is back, and there is clear coordinated competition between authoritarian countries and democracies. Now, these are big shifts in our global environment, and of course the Australian government's approach will be led by the Deputy Prime Minister, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. They are important to my work because they also have significant domestic security implications, and that is in part because of technology. During past periods of intense global competition, the security of Australians wasn't really affected until we actively joined a conflict. But today, new tools of statecraft are bringing what would otherwise be global security challenges into the everyday lives and homes of our citizens. It's felt in our economy, where we're waking from a cyber slumber. It's felt in our private lives, where our identities are under threat and personal information is at risk. It's felt in business and research, where Australia's hard-won innovations are at constant risk of theft. And it's felt in our democracy, where foreign actors are trying to influence decisions in our parliaments and universities and subjecting Australians to online misinformation and disinformation campaigns which spread like viruses around our communities. So when you put all of this together, it's simple, but it's stark. Our government's view is that Australia faces the most dangerous set of strategic circumstances since the Second World War. And those circumstances are having real impacts on Australians even when they are at home. So what does this mean for Home Affairs? Peter Dutton was the first Minister for Home Affairs in the department's current incarnation. Indeed, he was its chief architect. He spoke at the Press Club in 2018, shortly after he'd taken on the job. And his speech is a genuinely fascinating description of his vision for the department. He talked about boats and borders. He talked about terrorism and child exploitation. He talked about bikies, organised crime, illicit drugs and deportations, all very important issues. It included, naturally, a Dutton-esque sprinkling of light moral panic. But if you strip out all of the politics, he describes this department doing incredibly important things, but it's an oddly narrow view of Home Affairs, and it's one designed to tackle a fundamentally different national security environment than the one that I've described to you today. To protect the domestic security of our nation, Home Affairs must continue its important work as set out in 2017. But it must also do some of its old work in new ways, and it must do some new work entirely. In the category of old work in new ways, there's no better place to start than cybersecurity. In September and October this year, Australia experienced its 2 worst ever cyber attacks in our history within 3 weeks of each other. 2 months ago, the National Australia Bank told Australians that they are subject to 50 million attempted cyber attacks a month. The Australian Taxation Office, 3 million a month. This threat is huge, it is relentless, and it is only getting bigger. Cybersecurity is suddenly a hot topic in the boardroom and at the kitchen table. Our government has commitment and resolve to fix this, but it is going to take time. Better cybersecurity for Australia means all businesses and citizens changing how they engage with the internet. We need to prepare for more cyber attacks over the coming years as we undertake this incredibly important work. And the truth is that in cybersecurity, we are unnecessarily vulnerable. We did not do the work nationally over the last decade to help us prepare for this national challenge. Prime Minister Morrison's decision to abolish the Cybersecurity Ministry when he came to office was an absolute shocker. So let me say briefly what we have done since the Albanese government was elected. For the first time, Australia will punch back at the hackers through a collaboration between the Australian Federal Police and the Australian Signals Directorate. This will be a 100-person team permanently focused on hunting down people who would seek to do us harm and hacking back. It will take some time to get this singing, but when it does, it will change the game for cybersecurity in our country. We've made some big changes to how the Australian government responds to cyber incidents. We've legislated a proper penalties regime under privacy law, and we've taken leadership of a new global disruption effort under the 36-country counter-ransomware initiative. I am a big believer in good analysis after a crisis. Our government has asked one of Australia's foremost cybersecurity and telco experts, Rachel Falk, to look at what Home Affairs could learn from the Optus and Medibank incidents. And in the coming months, we will translate this enormous power of work that she has done into public policy reform. Optus and Medibank were terrible events. I felt them very deeply. In fact, my family was caught up in both. It's now my job to turn this set of unbelievable disasters into a permanent step change in cybersecurity for our country. I want Australia to be the most cyber-secure country in the world by 2030. And I believe that's possible. But we need a reset and we need a pathway to get there. That's why today I am announcing a major program of work to develop a new cybersecurity strategy for Australia. The cybersecurity strategy will help Australia bring the whole nation into the fight to protect our citizens and to protect our economy. It will help us strengthen critical infrastructure and government networks. It will help us build sovereign capabilities in cybersecurity because this is something Australia must be able to do for itself. And it will help us strengthen our international engagement so Australia can play a leadership role on the global stage and work in partnership with our Pacific neighbours to lift cybersecurity across our region. This project is going to be led by 3 experts. Andy Penn, who, lucky for us, has just rolled off as CEO of Telstra, and he's agreed to devote his incredible intellect and energy to this national effort. Rachel Falk, who I mentioned earlier, one of Australia's preeminent cybersecurity experts who has helped us with Optus and Medibank, will also join this team. And Mel Hupfeld, the former Chief of Air Force, will lend his hugely significant national security experience to this project. In addition to this amazing group of Australians, some of the biggest cyber guns from around the world love the scale of our ambition, and they've agreed to help. Former UK Cybersecurity Centre CEO and eminent Oxford University Professor Kieran Martin will lead a global cyber expert panel who will ensure that our work really is world-leading. Across government, Finance Minister Katie Gallagher will work with me on the government-facing aspects of the strategy, and Assistant Minister Tim Watts will lead our international focus. We've got the burning platform, we've got the mandate for change, we've genuinely now got the best minds on the problem, and now it's time to translate that into a more cybersecure Australia. Let me turn now to foreign interference. Each year, ASIO provides an annual assessment of our national threats. In this year's assessment, ASIO Director-General Mike Burgess told Australia that for the first time, espionage and foreign interference have replaced terrorism as the most significant domestic security issue we face, an enormous thing to happen in our security environment. Espionage and foreign interference threaten the things we value most about our country: our social cohesion, our trusted democracy, freedom of thought in our academic sector. This is a fight that really, really matters. We need an ambition and a scale of response here that matches the size of the problem. We've got to strip the politics out of this conversation. This problem is not limited to the actions of one or two countries. Under the former government, the way politicians talked about foreign interference was over-politicised and frankly a bit xenophobic. And any security expert will tell you that that approach is deeply counterproductive for our national security. ASIO Director-General Burgess has said repeatedly, our best asset in the fight against foreign interference are the Australian people, and within that, our loved and loyal diaspora communities. My experience in dealing with this problem so far is that for most people who would be targets of foreign interference or be in its orbit, think about politicians, academics, community leaders, they desperately want to fight this problem. And part of the next phase of our policy response will be to start to open up a bit and focus on arming the people who need to understand this problem with usable information. So we'll do that through a program of direct engagement with possible targets of foreign interference to help them understand what foreign interference looks like, how does it present, what does the playbook look like, so we can help them understand what they can do to protect themselves so they can help us protect our country. Immigration is the third area of existing work where a big evolution for Home Affairs is required. The global challenges that we face are enormous. Why wouldn't we invite the best and brightest people from around the world to come and help us tackle them? Yet today, our immigration system doesn't allow for anything of the sort. It's complex, it's bureaucratic, it lacks strategy, it's expensive and glacially slow. It's not serving the needs of our country, of business or of migrants. Under the former government, the debate centred so much, almost exclusively, on how we keep people out rather than what we do to get people here who we need here. We are in a fierce competition for global talent, but our competitors are well into the marathon while we are noodling around at the starting blocks. When we came to government, there were almost 1 million unprocessed visas just sitting there in the system in the middle of the biggest labour shortage we have experienced since the Second World War. To me, that was emblematic of the lack of interest by former ministers in this so foundational a task of the Australian government. Due to sheer inertia, the system had defaulted into bringing in very high numbers of temporary, lower skilled workers who churned through the labour market. And as a result, Australia today has a problem we have always studiously avoided, and that is a large underclass of undocumented migrant workers who are living in our country today and extremely vulnerable to exploitation. That is not what a world-class migration system looks like, and it's completely out of step with Australia's hugely successful historical focus on migration based on permanency, on citizenship, and on fair rights for workers no matter where they come from. Determining who should be invited to join us in our national endeavours is one of the most important things that the Australian government does. And we're going to take a run at fixing it through a big piece of work being led by former Secretary of the Treasury and Prime Minister and Cabinet, Martin Parkinson, AC, PSM. I've talked about cybersecurity, countering foreign interference and immigration as 3 areas of work where the department needs to evolve to help us confront the challenges ahead. And I now want to speak about 3 additional areas of new work that I am working with the department to undertake. And the first is in relation to climate change. Our government, under the leadership of Minister Murray Watt, will be the first in Australian history to run disaster management as a centralised, well-coordinated, enduring function of the Australian government. It is time for us all to stop feigning shock at supposedly once-in-a-generation floods and fires and storms. The world has witnessed a 10-fold increase in the number of natural disasters since the 1960s, and this is going to get worse as the world warms further. We need disaster management to be a routine, seamless, well-practiced function of Australian government so that when multiple disasters strike, government and the community are not completely consumed by them. Australia is the developed country in the world most at risk from the warming climate. And in national security, the former government's unwillingness to acknowledge this reality of climate change was foolish, dogmatic and reckless. Peter Dutton approached Home Affairs with a posture that was reactive to the issues and reactionary in the politics. It didn't make us any safer, and I would like to change it. We know a lot about the national security environment we are heading into. There are some events ahead that are quite easily foreseeable. Yet the Australian government has not seriously considered what those events will mean for us on the home front. As we enter a period of increased competition in our region, will Australia be able to get what it needs from the world? Are we too reliant on some countries for things that we cannot survive without? And what should we do about those things? As the national security implications of climate change become better understood, what do we need to do to prepare beyond institutionalising disaster management? So today I'm announcing 2 new pieces of work to deal with these questions that will be undertaken by Home Affairs. The first will focus on national resilience, and the output will be a clear, cross-cutting, cross-government picture of the home front implications of the climate and security environment we face, and it will provide recommendations for government about the steps we need to take to ensure that Australians continue to live their beautiful life of security and prosperity while the incredible global complex issues we face are played out around the globe. The National Resilience Task Force will work to explore how Australia can be better placed to deal with shocks and crises. And this will include looking at whether we have the right legislative frameworks and authorities to manage national challenges that we are likely to confront. It will look at how we're anticipating future shocks and give advice to government about what we can do to make sure that we can bounce back quickly, especially when we are confronted with multiple concurrent events. The second piece of work is a significant look at the resilience of Australia's democracy. So let me just quickly explain why this is a national security issue. In our quest to keep Australians safe in the coming decades, our democracy will be our biggest national asset, and we need to protect our national assets. And because competitor countries are seeking to undermine our democracy, and we need to fight back. Their intention is to justify authoritarianism by making it look like democracies are inherently dysfunctional, and to weaken countries like ours and constrain us from responding to global events that our adversaries may create. The task force will consider the enormous volume of work that has been done on this question in Australia already, including insights and expertise of Australia's civil service. It will include, for example, the work completed by the Democracy 2025 partnership between Professor Mark Evans and the Museum of Australian Democracy. The Group of 7 and the OECD have done a lot of work on the question of resilient democracies. There is a very large volume of academic research into social capital and trust between and among citizens and government. We know that foreign interference, misinformation and disinformation are on the rise, and we need to reduce our susceptibility to those efforts, and that will include thinking about a new generation of initiatives in civics and social cohesion. And we need to explore what we can do with tech companies to reduce the spread of polarisation and falsehoods, which become such an important part of our lives. Australians can get pretty down on our democracy. There are good reasons for that. And indeed, a bit of Australian scepticism in the world of politics is a very, very healthy thing. But politicians like me need to tell a better story about Australia's world-leading democratic history. We are the 6th oldest democracy in the world. We are the great democratic innovator, the inventor of the secret ballot, one of the first countries in the world to give women the right to vote. We have very high participation in our democracy and a strong and independent electoral commission, and politicians do their part and respect the result. We have a brilliant independent media, which despite its many challenges, does a bloody good job. We have a hell of a lot to be proud of here. Labor's first female parliamentarian, Dorothy Tagney, said in her first speech to the Senate in September 1943, when Australia was, of course, at war, "We shall make this country what it should be, a model for all other democracies to follow." One of the most powerful things Australia can do for the world is prove that democracy works. We cannot allow the global debate to settle into the lazy thinking of false equivalencies, where somehow all political systems are morally equal. They are not. People should choose their leaders. To me, to us, that is a truism. But democracy is not just a political system. It is a mindset about community, pluralism, tolerance, rationality, choice, and freedom. And yet, trust in democracy is in substantial decline in Australia and around the world. And populism and polarisation are on the rise. And we cannot stand by and do nothing. I have had many discussions with global democracy experts over the last 6 months. This is a much admired problem. Many can explain the shapes and contours. No one seems to know what to do. And in this, I want Australia to lead the way. What can we do concretely about the problems our democracy faces so Australia can be the light on the hill? This will be the work of the Strengthening Democracy Task Force in the Home Affairs Department. So let me quickly summarise. To prepare Australia for what is to come, our government is reshaping the work of Home Affairs. We will continue our strong focus on critical national security issues such as terrorism. We will evolve how we work in some key areas. I have mentioned cybersecurity, foreign interference and immigration. And we need to engage in some new areas of work: disaster management, national resilience and the strength of our democracy. Let me finish by saying something brief about the tenor of our national security conversation. And I want to ask everyone here to consider what assumptions they may have about what strength in national security looks like. Are the people who keep us safe those with the harshest words and the biggest, scariest rhetoric? If that were the case, we would be brilliantly positioned for the national security challenges we face after 9 years of Peter Dutton in key national security roles. And we're not. In this crucial national security discussion, we should never conflate chest beating with strength. We should never confuse fighting words with resolve and the commitment and ability to deliver. Part of the problem with the old, broken conversation of the last decade was the endless, rampant politicisation of every area of Australian public policy. It was not just a wasted decade on energy policy or economic reform. It was a decade where we could have done so much more to help our country be safe. And yet in national security, what I saw was so much public policy being designed not to make our country safer, but to bludgeon or wedge Labor. Our government is taking a different approach. The PM has made it absolutely clear to his cabinet. The threats that we face are serious and urgent, and our response cannot and will not be driven by politics. We need determined, clear-eyed analysis and steely, calm, methodical delivery. Scalpels, not sledgehammers. And that's what we're getting from the PM, the DPM and the Foreign Minister. In defence, Richard Marles is a person of depth and vision. With his single-minded determination to make our country safer, faster, he is putting us on a path to revolutionising our ability to defend ourselves. I'm so grateful for the work he is doing as a colleague, but also as an Australian. And in foreign affairs, just look at the mess that was left for Penny Wong. Our global reputation in real trouble, the leader of one of our closest allies driven to call our then Prime Minister a liar, our failure to recognise the climate crisis, which created enormous tensions with our Pacific neighbours. For goodness sake, they couldn't even get along with New Zealand. Australia's reputation and role in the world have been comprehensively reshaped by Penny Wong in just 6 months. Every Australian should sleep safer at night knowing that these serious people have charge of these crucial areas of public policy. Now, there are many in the opposition who are good, thoughtful people, and I think they know that the approach we are taking, strong, serious, depoliticised, is how we make our country safer, not by beating our chests and playing the politics of the moment. A better standard of debate than what we saw over the last 9 years would be a good and important thing for the country. We're showing up for it, and I hope they do too. My friend Annika Wells reminds us that our goal in politics should be to be a good ancestor. The issues that will define the lives of my children and grandchildren are not bikies and boat people. They are how Australia's governments manage climate change, how they navigate our interests with regard to China, and how they protect Australians in the face of the biggest shift in the global world order since the Second World War. Two ideas are foundational to my approach to politics. When Australia needs to change, we cannot afford to look back. Our goal is transformation, not restoration. And I am profoundly optimistic every day for my country. No country is better positioned for a safe and prosperous future than Australia. We have huge power to shape the world around us, but we have to be smart and agile about how we prepare our country for what lies ahead, and in particular, how we play things over the coming decade. And if I can play a meaningful role in that, it will be the most important work that I do in my lifetime. Thank you.